We're now going to move on to some modelled writing. And modelled writing is me recording me writing live so that you can see the whole writing process whilst I describe what I'm thinking. The modelled writing in this lesson is going to be for some plans for former IELTS test questions. So in this lesson, you will see more examples of plans for task 1 questions, and you will better understand the importance of a good plan and as well how to write one for yourself. Before we move on to taking a look at some of the questions and the modelled writing, I'd like to further describe why I feel that plans are highly important to you getting the best possible score in your writing task 1 report. I'm going to do this by showing you an example of a plan written by an IELTS 7 Plus student. I'm going to read through this plan and see if I can understand what kind of data and visual information the student has seen. Let's take a look at the plan now. Let's begin by taking a look at the top of this student's plan. So we have Group 1 married women, Group 2 married men. So I know that the data must include both men and women married. Overview. Married women unpaid hours. Unpaid hours, I'm starting to think of work or employment. Married women unpaid hours increases with the children count, with the amount of children. Okay, so I'm still thinking of employment and people having children. And the next part, married men, unpaid hours are almost the same and slightly decreases with 3 plus children. So I'm definitely starting to think that the data is showing something about work and children. And of course, underneath the plan, you can see my response. If you would like to pause the video and have another read, then please do. But I'm going to move on to taking a look at the data given to the student. We'll have a read through this question on the right now. The graph below shows the average hours of unpaid work per week for different categories of people. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Let's take a quick look through the visual information and data for this question. So as always, start with the title, which is Unpaid Work Hours per Week. Just below that, in red, we have married women, and in black, we have married men. Along the y-axis is the amount of unpaid hours per week going from 0 to 60. And along the x-axis we have without children, with 1 to 2 children, with 3 plus children. Having a quick look at the data presented in red for married women, we can see that the amount of unpaid hours increases. Whereas with men, it actually looks like it decreases slightly. Now we'll return to the plan and see if the student has really understood this information and if they have a plan that will help them structure their report. Beginning with the grouping of married women and married men, yes, I think that makes perfect sense to split the data and organize our writing into logical paragraphs. And the overview, married women unpaid hours increases with the children count. Yes, that is also what I saw straight away. And for married men unpaid hours are almost the same and slightly decreases with 3 plus children, which is something that I noticed straight away. We can see from this student's example that by creating a plan Firstly, we can easier understand the data and visual information given to us on the day of our test. And secondly, it helps us to think about the structure of our report. So, two very important reasons that I think you should write a plan. Okay, well done to that student. It's time for us to move on to our example questions and the model write of plans. Let's take a look at the first question now. The line graph shows the production and demand for steel in London over 4 years. Summarise the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So here is our line graph. Let's take a look at the data shown to us, again starting with the title. So we have steel production and demand in London. To the left, on the y-axis, we have millions of tonnes, from 2,000 million tonnes all the way to 7,000 million tonnes. On the key on the right, we can see in blue, steel produced, and in orange on the dotted line is the steel demand. Across the bottom are the 4 years from 2011 to 2014. So now that we've had a quick read through the data and we're starting to get an idea of what we are being shown, it's time for us to move on to creating a plan. Let's begin our model right. So the first thing we need to consider is splitting our data into two groups. Now straight away I can see we have steel produced and steel demand. Now would that make a good group for paragraph 3, paragraph 4? If we grouped them, we wouldn't be able to easily make comparisons, which of course is a big skill in describing this data here. So I think the best thing for us to do is to split the groups by year. So in group 1, I can have, quite simply, 2011 to 2012. And in group 2, which will be my 4th paragraph of reported information, we will have 2013 to 2014. Now for the overview section of my plan. So, how can I quickly summarize this data here without giving too many specific facts and figures? I think I'll go with SP, which you may know is steel produced. So, the overall picture for steel produced is decreased quite highly over time. And then we will have SD for steel demand. So generally speaking, dropped here. So we can say dropped although recovered well. So I have SP, which is steel produced. Overall, steel produced decreased over time, and it was by quite a large amount, although for the overview we don't need to go into very specific figures. And then for steel demand, it dropped but then recovered to a reasonable amount. So there is our first example question and plan, and that's exactly the process that you will need to follow when you see the data and you analyze the data and then create your own plan too. Let's take a look at one more task 1 example. Let's read through the question. The table below shows the percentages of population aged over 65 in 3 countries. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Let's take a look at that table now. Okay, so we have 3 countries, Canada, Germany and the UK. And the 3 years are 1988, 2000 and 2025. So that is a predicted amount. The percentages are below, shown for 3 years for each country. Let's take a quick look at what happens in Canada. So, people aged over 65 in 1988 was around 16%. In 2000 it was 20. In 2025 or 2025 it was 26.35. So we can see every year this amount increases. In Germany we begin at 18. Then move to 25 and 30. So once again, this is a clear increase in the percentage of people over 65. In the UK, in 1988, we have 14%. And in 2000, it only increases very slightly, but it is still an increase. And in 2025, we have 20%. So everywhere there is an increase in people aged over 65. I've now got a quick overall idea of what is happening in this visual information and data, so it's time for me to write my plan. Once again, for a task 1 plan, the first thing that I need to consider is the grouping of this data, splitting the data into 2 groups to structure my report. What's interesting about this table is that we have 3 countries and 3 years, which are the obvious ways to split the data. Because it's an odd number, it means that our grouping will be uneven. I'm going to go with group 1 as being 1988 and 2000. And for group 2, I'll go with 1 year, which will be 2025. There will be more to describe in group 1, and that's because we have all this set of data here. And in group 2, we only have this. But we want the paragraphs and the group descriptions to be equal, so I will just pick a few features. Having slightly uneven groupings won't matter much as long as you describe the most important aspects of the data. It's now time to have a look at our overview plan. I think from describing the table earlier, the most important thing that we can describe simply without going into too much detail is to say overall people aged over 65 increased in all countries and all years. In fact, for my overview paragraph, I may not want to write much more than this for it, although I could say, just to add another sentence, UK 1988 to 2000 was slight in its increase. It actually only increased around 0.5%, which was definitely the lowest amount of increase. I could possibly say that in my overview. So that's all for my plan. I've grouped the data, I've analysed the information so I understand it more, and I've created a plan. And I know that this plan will help me structure a high-scoring Task 1 report. I'm now going to show you a question that I want you to write your own plan for in the Q&A section. So let's take a look at that now. I'm not going to go through the question and go through all the different data and visual information with you because I want you to do this practice activity on your own. Analyze the data, have a look and understand the information you are being shown, and then write your plan. Put this in the Q&A section and then we can give each other some feedback. Best of luck with this practice activity, and I'll see you in the next lesson.